Have you ever wondered what would happen if the Sorcerer Supreme Doctor Strange himself was tasked not with protecting Earth, but an entire galaxy consumed by endless war? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear will twist your idea of both universes and reveal a truth darker than anything the eye of Agamotto has ever seen. It began not with light, but with silence, the kind that makes even time itself hesitate to move. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, the candles of eternity flickered as if something enormous had exhaled across the multiverse. Dr. Stephen Strange, master of mystic arts, felt it like a tremor through the soul, a pulse that did not belong to this reality. He opened the eye. What he saw was not another world, but another law of existence entirely. A realm where faith and fear shaped matter, where gods fed on belief, and every whisper of emotion could become a weapon. The vision bled into his mind, 1,000 worlds burning beneath a golden throne, a galaxy screaming in worship and war. The warp had reached out and it wanted him. Strange knew the danger of crossing dimensions, but something in that call felt desperate. There was intelligence behind the chaos, an ancient will twisting the boundaries of every plane he had ever studied. It wasn't summoning him, it was challenging him. And Stephen Strange never ignored a challenge. He stepped beyond the mirror veil, casting himself through layers of thought, dream, and time until the concept of where lost all meaning. His body ceased to matter, only his will remained. When his senses returned, he stood beneath a broken sky, clouds of ash swirling over ruins vast enough to crush cities. It was not Earth. It was not anywhere he had known. Massive structures loomed like cathedrals made of bone and steel, their walls carved with prayers to a silent god. Above, burning ships screamed through the atmosphere, raining fire upon each other. Every explosion echoed with a word he did not yet understand: Emperor. And then, the whispers began. They rose from the ground, from the air, from the cracks between thoughts. The warp was alive, an ocean of consciousness that fed on fear. Strange could feel it pressing against his mind, curious and cruel. He saw faces in the smoke, hands reaching from dimensions that should not exist. His magic flared instinctively, wards spinning in golden arcs, but the pressure only intensified. The warp did not speak in language. It spoke in emotion. It showed him despair. Billions crying out across stars, their faith turned into a weapon against themselves. He felt the agony of worlds forgotten, the madness of minds broken by prayer. And through it all, the laughter of something vast and patient. Doctor Strange realized the truth in a flash of horror: this universe had no Sorcerer Supreme. No order. No balance. Magic here was chaos incarnate, and it ruled everything through corruption and faith. Before he could retreat, they found him. Warriors descended from the skies, giants in armor that shimmered with psychic fire. Their voices carried through the smoke like thunder made holy. By the will of the Emperor, sorcery is forbidden. Strange tried to speak, to explain, but their minds were already upon him, telepathic blows that shattered his concentration. He deflected one, then another, each impact shaking the very ground. They weren't ordinary soldiers, they were conduits of something greater. And then it hit him: these were not men. They were living prayers, armored in faith, bound by an idea so powerful it rivaled magic itself. He summoned the crimson bands of Sidorak, crimson sigils coiling like serpents, holding their blades at bay. But even as he fought, he could feel the warp watching. Testing him. Amused. One of the warriors stepped forward, his mind burning with light. "You reek of the warp's corruption," he growled. "Name yourself before judgment." "I am Dr. Stephen Strange," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Sorcerer Supreme of my universe. I came to answer a call from beyond. The warrior's helm tilted. Then you are already damned. Strange's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. With a thought, he invoked the winds of Watum and reality itself bent around him. The battlefield erupted in golden fury as his power collided with theirs. Faith against will. Order against chaos. For every blow he deflected, a new one came stronger. For every ward he cast, the warp whispered a counterspell of madness. And as the dust cleared, both sides stood locked in defiance, the sorcerer of another world, and the knights of a dying god. Neither side yet understood that the true enemy was watching, waiting for the moment when their clash would tear open a wound that no magic could heal. What if faith itself could be weaponized? Not as a symbol, not as hope, but as a force that bends reality, corrupts the soul, and destroys everything that doubts it? Doctor Strange awoke to the echo of that question in his mind. His body was bound in chains forged not of metal, but of pure psychic will. The Grey Knights, the elite demon hunters of this strange, tormented galaxy, had captured him. The walls of his cell hummed with wards meant to crush sorcery, to silence thought itself. He could still feel the presence of the warp pressing against the edges of his consciousness, like a fevered dream that refused to fade. It whispered through the cracks in his mind 1,000 voices, each promising truth, each dripping with deceit. Strange closed his eyes and steadied his breathing. He'd faced gods before. He'd outwitted Dormammu. But this was something worse. The warp didn't want to kill him. It wanted to convert him. The door opened with a hiss that sounded more like a prayer. A figure entered, massive, armored in silver that glowed faintly with runes of exorcism. His voice, when it came, was calm and terrifying in its certainty. You will speak, heretic. You will confess your allegiance to the warp. Strange met the man's gaze through the crimson glow of his restraints. I told you. I serve no demon, no god, no emperor. I am the protector of my realm. Every sorcerer says the same, the knight replied. Until the screaming begins. He raised his hand, and psychic energy poured into the air, not as an attack, but as a test. The room darkened, the chains tightened, and the warp's whispers surged like a flood. Strange could feel them clawing at his thoughts, pulling at his memories, showing him visions of his failures, Christine's death, the fall of Camartage, the endless cycle of saving and losing. But this was not his first trial by illusion. He whispered an incantation, his voice steady as a blade. By the light of the Vishanti, I banish falsehood. The illusions shattered like glass. The Grey Knight froze, astonishment flickering behind his helm. Few could resist the psychic purges of the Imperium. Fewer still could repel the warp itself. Strange took the moment to speak, not as a prisoner, but as a teacher. You think your enemy is sorcery, he said quietly. But it's ignorance. You fight shadows without seeing the hand that casts them. The knight hesitated, and in that pause, Strange sensed it. A fracture. Doubt. The faintest crack in the armor of faith. But before he could press further, the air in the chamber warped. Light bled out of the walls, and the sound of reality tearing itself apart filled the room. The warp had found them. A rift opened, not like his portals, which obeyed geometry and control, but a wound, a screaming absence where space forgot how to exist. From it poured entities made of emotion, rage given form, despair given wings. The knight turned, his weapon blazing with psychic fire, chanting the Emperor's name as if it were a shield. Strange broke his bonds with a surge of pure will, the eye of Agamotto flaring like a second sun. Sigils of ancient power spun from his hands as he stepped into the storm, his voice echoing through the madness. In the name of balance, be still. The warp recoiled. The entities twisted, shrieking, as his magic clashed with theirs in a chaos of color and wool. The Grey Knight stood beside him now, fighting not a man, but alongside one. For a moment, a single, fragile heartbeat, there was unity. When the rift finally collapsed, silence returned. The knight, his armor scorched, turned to Strange and spoke softly. If you are not of the warp, then what are you? Strange looked past him, to the ceiling that trembled with the weight of distant stars. A mistake, he said quietly. Or maybe, a warning. Outside, the Imperium's ships turned their guns toward the sky. For the warp storm was spreading and Strange could feel it. Something vast and intelligent had noticed their defiance. It was watching him now. Studying him. And somewhere, far beyond mortal perception, the Chaos Gods whispered among themselves. He doesn't belong here, said one. Then make him. What if the God you prayed to was the very force that demanded your suffering? Dr. Strange had seen gods before, entities that fed on faith, that demanded worship as currency. But nothing compared to the weight of belief in the Imperium of Man. It wasn't just religion here. It was infrastructure. It was oxygen. Without faith, this galaxy would choke on its own despair. Strange stood aboard an inquisitorial vessel now bound not by chains, but by curiosity. The Grey Knight who had once sought his death now stood as his escort. Around them, robed figures chanted softly, their words half machine, half prayer. The Inquisition had summoned him to Terra, the seat of the Emperor, the so-called corpse god who ruled from a golden throne. He had glimpsed the warp's horrors. Now, he would face the faith that sustained them. As the ship cut through the void, Strange gazed out through reinforced glass. The warp flickered just beyond the Geller field, waves of unreality crashing against the thin veil of sanity that protected the vessel. The colors shifted like oil on water, whispering shapes that weren't quite there. He could feel the presence of sentient hunger beyond it, watching, waiting. Your curiosity will damn you, said the Grey Knight at his side. Or save you, Strange replied. The knight didn't answer. When the ship descended upon Terra, the sight stole even Strange's breath. The planet was not a world. It was a machine, continents paved with metal, oceans turned to ash, a billion cathedrals rising toward a burning sun. The air itself shimmered with psychic energy. Humanity's collective devotion radiated upward, feeding a golden light at the planet's core. Strange could feel it, the Emperor's mind. It wasn't alive in the way a mortal was. It was a sun made of thought, a being whose consciousness had outgrown flesh and sanity alike. It stretched across time, holding back the tide of the warp by sheer will. But even in its brilliance, Strange sensed rot. The light flickered. The great psychic barrier that kept the galaxy safe was cracking. The Inquisitors led him into the heart of the Imperial Palace, a labyrinth of silence and devotion. Statues of saints towered above, their faces worn smooth by centuries of tears. At the end of the hall waited an old woman, draped in red and gold. Her eyes gleamed with the power of someone who had seen too much and believed too deeply. Inquisitor Valeria, the knight whispered. She speaks for the throne. Valeria studied Strange as though dissecting a dream. You are an anomaly, she said. The Emperor has felt your arrival. The warp quivers around your name. Strange inclined his head slightly. Then perhaps he understands why I'm here. Her lips curved, not in a smile, but in something colder. You misunderstand, sorcerer. You are not here by your will. You were brought. Her words struck him like a revelation. The tremor in the astral plane. The call that had pulled him through dimensions. It hadn't been the warp calling him. It had been the Emperor. The realization rippled through his mind. He summoned me, Strange whispered. But why? Valeria turned, leading him deeper into the sanctum. The air grew thicker, charged with psychic static. He felt it now, millions of souls dying every second, their life force funneled into a single purpose. Keeping one being alive. When they reached the chamber, Strange stopped. The golden throne towered before him, more machine than divinity. And upon it sat what remained of a man, skeletal, radiant, held together by the energy of 10,000 souls burning in sacrifice every day. The Emperor of mankind. Strange could hardly breathe. He could see the Emperor's mind as a vast storm of light, brilliant, agonized, endless. And beneath it, a shadow. Something coiled and ancient, feeding on that same light. The warp was not only outside, it was inside the Emperor. Valeria bowed her head. You stand before God. But Strange saw the truth. No, he said softly. You stand before a prisoner. The Emperor's eyes opened, twin suns of psychic fire. The voice that followed wasn't sound. It was revelation. Stranger from another realm, it said. You bring imbalance. You do not belong. Strange braced himself. You called me. I answered. Tell me what you want. For a long moment, the chamber was silent. Then, like a dying star collapsing inward, the Emperor spoke again. The warp grows. My light fades. I needed one untouched by its madness. You will take my place. The words hit Strange like a physical blow. Take his place. Sit upon the throne that consumed 10,000 souls a day. Become the anchor of a galaxy built on worship and despair? He shook his head. I am no god. The light dimmed, the air trembling. You are what I made you to be. Before he could respond, the warp surged again, a psychic scream tearing through the palace. Valeria collapsed, blood pouring from her eyes. Strange turned and saw the impossible, tendrils of unreality snaking through the golden walls, reaching for the Emperor himself. And through that rift, the voice of the warp whispered like laughter made of knives. We have been waiting for you, Strange. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the very evil you fought your whole life, offered you the power to save everything? Dr. Strange stood in the storm between worlds. The warp was no longer a distant murmur, it was a living ocean, and it had chosen to speak. Reality itself bent like molten glass as voices formed from the fabric of emotion, sorrow, rage, lust, decay. They weren't sounds but feelings, thoughts that clawed into his mind with honeyed whispers. He was falling, though there was no up or down. Just color, thought, and madness. 4 shapes emerged from the storm, each vast beyond comprehension, each radiating an essence that twisted everything it touched. The Chaos Gods. Kern, the red storm of fury and blood, thundered across the psychic sea, a voice of eternal rage that shook even Strange's astral form. Tzianch, the ever-changing, shimmered beside him, 1,000 eyes blinking, each reflecting a different possible future. Nurgle, the rotting father, smiled with a sickly warmth, his laughter a plague that corroded time. And Slaanesh, beautiful and monstrous, moved like temptation given form, every motion promising relief and ruin in the same breath. You do not belong here, sorcerer, said Tzianch, his words flowing like serpents. And yet, you are exactly where you must be. Strange steadied himself in the void. I'm not your pawn. I serve no god. Slaanesh's voice slid through the air like silk over a blade. But you serve something, don't you? Balance. Order. Preservation. You fight chaos every day, and yet here, you could control it. Kern's laughter was thunder. He talks too much. Let him bleed. Patience, brother, Xianj replied. He could be useful. The warp rippled. Strange could feel their attention focusing, 1,000 wills pressing against his mind. They wanted something from him. Not just his power, but his place in the pattern of the multiverse. You see it, don't you? Murmured Nurgle, his tone almost gentle. Your Earth is dying, your people repeating the same sins, your cosmos unraveling under its own arrogance. You could stop it all. You could heal it. Strange clenched his fists. By becoming you. No. I've seen what power without restraint does. Restraint. Xianj chuckled. You restrain reality every time you cast a spell. You rewrite its laws. You twist fate. You are already one of us. The words cut deep because they carried truth. Strange did manipulate reality, shaping what was and wasn't possible. He had long ago crossed moral lines in the name of protection. Every spell came at a cost. Every victory left scars. You think yourself above us, Xianj hissed, his form expanding into galaxies. But you are merely a rival priest. Your magic is our language. Your spells are our prayers. The storm convulsed, and suddenly Strange stood in a memory, the ruins of New York, earth burning, the people he had once sworn to protect screaming in silence. His heart clenched. It wasn't real. But it could become real. This is what awaits your world, whispered Slaanesh. Unless you accept the truth of power. He closed his eyes. I know what you're trying to do. Oh, do you? Said Xianj. Then tell me, Sorcerer Supreme, what happens when your universe falls? When there is no more balance to protect? Where will you run then? Before he could respond, another presence entered the storm, vast, blinding, agonized. The Emperor's consciousness tore through the warp like a dying sun, his psychic light burning through the chaos. Leave him. The Chaos Gods recoiled, their laughter fading into echoes. You dare challenge us in our domain? Xianj thundered. The Emperor's light flared. He is mine. And in that instant, Strange felt something he had never felt before, fear from the gods themselves. The warp screamed as the Emperor's will crushed a portion of it into submission. The color drained away, leaving only silence and starlight. Strange fell to his knees, gasping for air. He was back on Terra, but everything had changed. His mind still burned with the memory of the warp's voices, and deep down, a terrible seed had been planted, a question he couldn't escape. Had the Chaos Gods spoken truth? Was there really a difference between wielding magic and manipulating reality? Between being protector and controller? He could feel their laughter echoing in the corners of his mind even now. They hadn't lost. They had planted something. Valeria found him kneeling in the great hall, his hands trembling, the eye of Agamotto glowing with chaotic interference. What did you see? She demanded. Strange raised his head slowly. His eyes glimmered with power that wasn't entirely his own. I saw the truth, he said softly. Your Emperor, and the warp, they're two sides of the same coin. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the saints carved into the cathedral wall seemed to hold their breath. Valeria stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. Then we are all damned. Strange looked past her out into the endless stars. Somewhere, the Chaos Gods waited. Somewhere, the Emperor watched. And between them, a single man held the line. Dr. Stephen Strange. Sorcerer Supreme. Guardian of balance in a universe that knew no balance at all. What if salvation itself demanded destruction? What if the only way to save a universe was to unmake the faith that kept it alive? Doctor Strange had returned from the warp, changed. No longer the same man who entered as the Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, he now carried something within him, a spark of the warp's awareness, a whisper from beyond the veil that never fully went silent. Every breath, every thought was haunted by contradiction. He could feel the Emperor's psychic network, a vast, suffocating lattice of devotion binding humanity together like a cage made of light. Yet beneath it pulsed the same energy he had fought in the warp, the same emotional storm that fed chaos. Faith and corruption, order and madness, two sides of a single eternal loop. And Strange understood now, if the loop continued, this universe would collapse under the weight of its own belief. He walked through the halls of the Imperial Palace as whispers followed in his wake. Soldiers averted their eyes. Priests fell to their knees, unable to comprehend the aura of paradox around him. His presence flickered between holy and heretical to some, a sign of the Emperor's favor, to others, a walking blasphemy. The Inquisition watched closely. So did the Grey Knights. So did the warp. Valeria confronted him again beneath the shadow of the throne. You claim the Emperor and the warp are the same, she said. Then why does his light keep them at bay? Strange turned to her, his voice steady but weary. Because he's not keeping them out. He's keeping them contained. The Emperor is the barrier and the prison. Her expression hardened. Then what are you suggesting? That maybe, he said, it's time to end the prison. Valeria stepped back as though struck. You would doom the galaxy. No, he replied quietly. I would set it free. The words spread like wildfire through the psychic web of Terra. Some worshippers began to dream of liberation not through the Emperor's light, but through understanding, through balance. Others saw Strange as the Antichrist of their faith, a sorcerer sent by the warp to undo everything mankind had built. Civil unrest rippled across planets. Priests preached his destruction. Prophets whispered his name as a second coming. Armies mobilized, not against Xenos or daemons but against each other. Strange watched it unfold with horror. He had only spoken the truth, but in a galaxy ruled by blind faith, truth was more dangerous than any weapon. He turned to the stars, searching for guidance, for calm. And that was when he felt it, the Emperor calling again. Not in words, but in pressure, a summons written into the fabric of reality. Strange answered. He appeared once more in the psychic sanctum of the throne, a place where light and thought blurred together. The Emperor's voice surrounded him. You spread doubt. Strange faced the burning figure. I spread awareness. You unravel the web that keeps my people alive. Your web, Strange said, his voice rising, feeds the same gods you claim to fight. You've trapped humanity in a loop of worship and war. You've built eternity out of fear. The Emperor's aura flared, shaking the chamber. Fear keeps them loyal. Faith keeps them strong. Strange's eyes burned with golden light. No. Fear keeps them weak. Faith makes them blind. The Emperor rose, his psychic form towering like a sun about to go supernova. The force of his will pressed down on Strange like gravity itself. You presume to judge what you cannot comprehend, mortal. You are a visitor, a flicker in eternity. I have borne the burden of a species for 10,000 years. And look where it's brought them, Strange countered. Endless war. Endless death. You're not saving humanity, you're preserving its suffering. For a moment, the light dimmed not in weakness, but in contemplation. Strange saw something then, buried deep within that psychic storm: exhaustion. Regret. The faintest spark of a man who once dreamed of peace. You could free them, Strange said softly. Let them find balance. Let them choose who they become. The Emperor's silence was heavy, cosmic. Then, quietly, if I fall, the warp devours them all. Strange hesitated. Because he knew it was true. Without the Emperor's psychic light, the warp would surge unchecked. The gods would consume every soul in the galaxy. Billions of lives would vanish in fire. But if he continued this way, nothing would ever change. Humanity would live forever in chains of its own making. The impossible choice weighed on him: let chaos reign and risk annihilation, or preserve tyranny for the sake of survival. He whispered, there has to be another way. The Emperor said nothing. And then, the warp struck. A psychic storm of unimaginable scale tore through the throne world. Every telepath in the Imperium screamed at once. The barrier between the warp and real space cracked open, and from the fracture, the voices of chaos thundered. You can't hold both worlds, Strange. Choose. The chamber shook, reality splitting into spirals of light and shadow. The Emperor turned his gaze upon Strange not with anger, but with finality. Then perhaps, he said, it is time to test your conviction. The light engulfed him. And Stephen Strange vanished. Some said he was destroyed. Others said he ascended. But somewhere, beyond time and sanity, the Sorcerer Supreme opened his eyes in a place where both the Emperor and the Chaos Gods had no dominion, a void untouched by faith or fear. And in that silence, for the first time since he arrived in this doomed galaxy, Doctor Strange was alone. What happens when even gods go silent? When belief itself collapses, and all that remains is the question, what now? Doctor Strange floated in a place beyond dimensions, a nowhere between the threads of creation. Here, there were no stars, no time, no sound. Only stillness, a vacuum so profound it bordered on peace. For the first time in what felt like eternity, the whispers of the warp were gone, the pull of the Emperor's light extinguished. He had escaped. Or perhaps, he had been exiled. He didn't know how long he drifted. Minutes, years, lifetimes, they all felt the same. But slowly, he began to rebuild himself, thought by thought. He reached inward, touching the fragments of his power, the Vishanti, the runes of Ragador, the flames of the Fulton, and found them weakened, thinned by distance from his own universe. Yet there was something else now, buried deep within his aura. The echo of the warp, wild, raw, unfiltered emotion. He had fought it, resisted it, denied it. But in this empty void, Strange began to see it differently. The warp wasn't just evil. It was the sum of every thought, every dream, every fear of sentient life. The reflection of consciousness itself. And in that realization, something new was born. He summoned his will, weaving magic unlike any he had ever cast before, part mystic art, part psychic manifestation. His hands traced sigils that pulsed not with order or chaos, but with understanding. The void trembled. Colors began to form, faint at first, then vivid. Shapes emerged, towers of light, symbols carved from pure will. A sanctum, but not one of stone or earthly structure. This was a sanctum of mind and meaning, a bridge between what was and what could be. Doctor Strange had built the last sanctum, a place beyond gods, beyond belief, where magic and the warp could coexist without consuming each other. As he stood in its heart, a voice drifted through the silence. It wasn't the Emperor. It wasn't chaos. It was something older, something he hadn't heard since his earliest days of training. You seek balance, Strange, it whispered. But balance cannot exist without weight. What will you sacrifice? He turned, and there, shimmering in golden light, was the Ancient One, or perhaps only a memory of her, called forth by his yearning for guidance. You cannot destroy the warp, she said gently. You can only change your relationship with it. The same is true for them. Strange understood. The galaxy did not need a savior. It needed a mirror. He reached out through the void, focusing on Terra, the heart of human faith. He could see it from afar now, the golden throne dimming, the warp bleeding into reality, the galaxy fracturing under its own belief. Humanity stood at the edge of extinction. He closed his eyes. Then let them see. The eye of Agamotto blazed open, not as a weapon, but as a window. Light surged through the void, spilling into the warp, then through the immaterium and back into the physical realm. Every psychic, every dreamer, every soul connected to the Emperor's light suddenly saw the truth of their faith, the truth of the warp, the truth of themselves. Billions wept. Billions screamed. Billions understood. And the warp changed. Where once it had been a storm of hatred and fear, now, for the briefest of moments, it shimmered with clarity. Not peace, never peace, but awareness. The emotions feeding it became balanced by understanding. The gods of chaos screamed, their dominion weakening, their power diluted by self-realization. On Terra, the Emperor stirred. His psychic eyes opened, not in rage, but in awe. For the first time in 10,000 years, he was not alone in carrying the weight of humanity's mind. Strange had shared it, distributed it. The burden was no longer his alone. But power always seeks equilibrium. The warp began to react violently, reality twisting as paradoxes collided. The last sanctum trembled. Strange could feel himself unraveling body, mind, and soul. His magic was holding the balance, but only barely. He understood then what the voice had meant. Balance demanded weight. He would have to become the anchor. Dr. Strange smiled faintly. So be it. He stepped into the center of the sanctum, raising his hands one final time. The sigils flared, merging with his essence. His body dissolved into light, his mind expanding beyond the limits of individuality. He felt everything: the cries of mortals, the hunger of gods, the endless pull between creation and destruction, and he held them all. The warp stilled. On Terra, the throne shone brighter than it had in millennia. The Emperor's head bowed, and for the first time, he whispered a prayer. Not for himself. For the man who had done what even a god could not. And in the void where Dr. Strange once stood, a single phrase lingered, a ripple across eternity. Magic is not control. It is compassion. Across the galaxy, faith began to evolve. The priests still prayed, but now, some whispered his name alongside the Emperor's. Others meditated in silence, feeling balance for the first time. The chaos gods withdrew, wounded but not destroyed, their voices quieter now, watching, waiting, adapting. The last sanctum remained unseen, unreachable, existing as a concept within the hearts of those who chose understanding over fear. And at its center, the Sorcerer Supreme kept his silent vigil, not as a conqueror, not as a god, but as the bridge between madness and meaning. Dr. Strange had not just protected the Warhammer galaxy. He had changed it forever. What if every choice, every sacrifice, every whisper across a billion souls echoed through not one universe, but all of them. In the silence that followed Strange's final act, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The warp had quieted, not gone, but gentler, like a wild beast momentarily soothed. The Emperor sat upon his golden throne, surrounded by stillness that felt almost alien. The Astronomicon pulsed with renewed light, not the harsh, blinding beacon it once was, but something softer, warmer. And through the folds of existence, through layers of reality thinner than thought, a ripple spread outward across dimensions, across time, across the multiverse itself. Somewhere, in the Marvel Universe, the Sorcerer Supreme's Sanctum Sanctorum trembled. Candles flared. The artifacts of countless battles began to resonate with unseen frequencies. The cloak of levitation drifted from its resting place, hovering as though searching for someone who was no longer there. Wang entered the chamber cautiously, sensing a disturbance he could not define. The air shimmered faintly golden, faintly scarlet, the remnants of two magics intertwined. "Stephen," he whispered, though he already knew the answer. And then he saw it, the eye of Agamotto, glowing faintly upon its pedestal. Not broken, not gone, but changed. The green light of the time stone was gone, replaced by a shifting aura of colors, impossible to describe. For a moment, it seemed to show him visions, a burning galaxy, a throne of gold, a storm of souls held together by sheer will. And in the middle of it all, Stephen Strange, neither alive nor dead, but everywhere. The vision vanished, leaving Wang trembling. He didn't know what had happened. He only knew that somewhere, beyond comprehension, Strange was still fighting not against darkness, but for the balance between all things. Back in the 40K galaxy, centuries began to pass. The Imperium adapted slowly, painfully. The ecclesiarchy fractured and reformed, reshaped by the doctrine Strange had unwittingly planted: understanding is not heresy, blindness is. Some worlds rejected the new creed. Others embraced it, forming the Order of the Silent Eye, a sect devoted not to worshipping the Emperor as a god, but to walking his path with awareness. Their symbol, a circle divided by light and shadow, the mark of the last sanctum. The Grey Knights, once the purest warriors of faith, began to meditate before battle, invoking not only the Emperor's name but the memory of the sorcerer who taught them to face their own fear without letting it consume them. Even the warp itself shifted. The gods of Chaosgurn, Nurgle, Tzientch, Slaanesh felt the change like a sickness. Their power, drawn from mortal extremes, began to waver. Some followers turned inward instead of outward, questioning the gods they served. Doubt, the one thing chaos could not truly control, had been weaponized. And far beyond them all, in the heart of the Immaterium, a presence watched. Doctor Strange had become something beyond the definitions of life, death, or even divinity. He existed as an equilibrium point, the calm between waves, the silence between prayers. The warp storms bent around him like a river around stone. He no longer spoke, but if one could have heard his thoughts, they would have been like this: there is no victory in domination. No peace in denial. Only balance, fragile, fleeting, but real. Yet the balance could not last forever. The multiverse demanded motion, and equilibrium is always temporary. One day, if time still had meaning, a crack appeared in the stillness. A vibration. A sound like distant thunder, echoing from another dimension. Strange turned, sensing something familiar, a frequency he hadn't felt since before his ascension. A rift opened, shimmering with the color of memory. Through it, he saw flashes: the Sanctum Sanctorum, Wang's face, and a voice calling his name. He reached out instinctively, his essence flickering. But something else came through the rift, not Wong, not a friend, but an energy older than either universe. It was the living tribunal. The cosmic judge appeared, its three faces shifting between calm, fury, and sorrow. Its voice rolled like thunder through the warp. "Stephen Strange. You have unbalanced the scale." Strange bowed his head. "I restored balance where there was none." "You tampered with the closed loop of faith and fear," the tribunal said. "You rewrote the laws of chaos and order. You have blurred the lines between magic and emotion, between universes that should never have touched." Strange looked up, unafraid. "And yet, they survive." The tribunal hesitated. For the first time, judgment faltered. "They do. But the cost echoes outward. The barriers weaken. The multiverse trembles." Through the cracks between realities, Strange could see glimpses, universes collapsing, realities bleeding into one another, infinite worlds shaking under the weight of paradox. His act of compassion had rippled beyond imagination. He realized then he had not ended the war. He had only changed its battlefield. The tribunal's voice deepened. "A new storm is coming. You may yet be needed not as a man, but as what you have become." And with that, the rift closed, leaving Strange alone once more. But this time, the silence was different. It was not peace, it was the calm before something larger, older, and far more dangerous. He looked across the infinite warp, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. Then let it come. The light around him pulsed once, twice, and vanished. Far away, across the stars, a lone scribe in the Imperium recorded a strange phenomenon, a pulse in the Astronomicon that formed words none could explain. Words in a language older than mankind. The sorcerer still watches. And somewhere, perhaps in a universe not yet written, the ripple continued to spread. What happens when two universes, never meant to meet, begin to remember each other? When echoes of gods, wars, and forgotten names start bleeding across creation like ink through paper. The multiverse was trembling. At first, it was subtle, a shift in the pattern of magic, a slight distortion in the cosmic fabric. Sorcerers across dimensions felt it before they could see it, the sensation that reality itself was breathing wrong. In the Marvel universe, the skies over Camartage darkened, constellations bending into new, impossible alignments. Across the galaxy of the Imperium, warp storms began to twist in unfamiliar rhythms, their chaotic energy resonating with frequencies no psychic could name. Something had connected them. And at the heart of it all, unseen, unmeasurable, was Doctor Strange. Though he no longer existed as a man, his essence pulsed between worlds, caught in a paradox of his own making. His sacrifice had not just balanced the warp, it had tethered two universes together. The magic of one now hummed in harmony with the madness of the other. At first, the effects were small. In the Marvel universe, relics began to whisper. The Darkhold, sealed away in dimensional vaults, stirred as if dreaming. In the Imperium, librarians of the Adeptus Asteroutes began reporting visions, glimpses of a blue world filled with sorcerers who bent reality through will rather than the warp. And then, the fractures widened. In Camartage, Wong stood before the mirror dimension, studying its surface. He had watched it shimmer for days now, reflecting not his own world but a storm of fire and metal, Gothic spires under blood-red skies, millions praying to a dying god. He whispered, "Stephen, what did you do?" Meanwhile, on Terra, the Emperor himself felt the distortion. The Astronomicon flickered, the psychic beacon shifting colors like a dying sun. His mind reached outward through the immaterium, and for the first time in 10,000 years, he sensed another source of magic, structured, ordered, elegant. Not warp-born, yet alive. He reached toward it. Across infinity, Wong did the same. And for a brief, impossible moment, the Emperor of Mankind and the Sorcerer Supreme's world touched. A voice rippled through both realities, neither fully human nor divine, echoing with calm authority, "The balance is breaking." That voice belonged to Strange. His presence flared briefly, visible as a silhouette of light threading through both worlds. "I tried to contain them," he said, his tone heavy with regret. "But compassion binds as tightly as chains. The two realities have begun to reflect each other, mirror to mirror, thought to thought." The Emperor's psychic aura blazed. "You would merge worlds that were never meant to coexist." "I didn't mean to," Strange replied. "But now that the connection exists, destruction would only hasten the collapse. We must stabilize them before the fracture becomes a wound." In the Marvel Universe, energies surged as artifacts awakened. The Eye of Agamotto pulsed in its case, casting symbols across the sanctum wall, sigils in High Gothic, the ancient tongue of the Imperium. In the 40K galaxy, the Emperor's throne chamber glowed with faint arcane markings, glyphs from another universe, symbols of the Vishanti. The universes were bleeding together. Soon, the effects grew catastrophic. Warp storms began to manifest in Marvel's space regions, where gravity bent and time folded like origami. Meanwhile, in the Imperium, traces of structured spellcraft began to appear, sorcery that worked without the warp, pure manipulation of reality through intellect and focus. The Inquisition called it unblessed magic. They burned entire worlds trying to contain it. And yet, there were those who saw opportunity. Xianch, the changer of ways, felt the new magic like a taste of forbidden fruit. His laughter rippled through the warp. "A new pattern," he whispered. "A new game." The god of change began weaving tendrils into the rift, eager to exploit this hybrid realm where Marvel's mysticism and the warp's chaos could intertwine. But he wasn't alone. In the Marvel cosmos, cosmic entities stirred eternity, infinity, even the tribunal itself drawn toward the rupture like moths to a dying star. Reality's framework was twisting, and the multiversal laws that governed separation were beginning to fail. Amid it all, Strange hovered between existence and oblivion, watching his unintended creation spiral toward collapse. His thoughts echoed through both worlds like the tolling of a cosmic bell. Balance is motion. Stillness is death. But what happens when two kinds of balance cannot coexist? He began to act. Drawing upon both forms of power, mystic and psychic, Strange manifested again, this time as a dual being, half woven from the light of the Vishanti, half shaped by the raw energy of the warp. He was no longer merely a Sorcerer Supreme. He was something else entirely, the ethereal custodian, guardian of convergence. He spread his consciousness across both universes, stabilizing the fractures where he could. He sealed wormholes that opened between galaxies. He whispered peace into the minds of those teetering on madness. But each act came at a cost. Every repair drained his essence further. Every barrier he raised drew attention from beings far beyond comprehension. Soon, even the gods began to fear what was coming. The warp trembled. The cosmic pantheon stirred. And somewhere in the heart of it all, something ancient, something neither of magic nor chaos, began to awaken. A consciousness that remembered when both universes were one, long before time split them apart. It whispered across realities, its words like cracks in eternity. Two worlds were born of the same thought. Now, they seek reunion. Strange felt it, deeper than fear and inevitability. He had not merely connected two universes. he had awakened the memory of their shared origin. The multiverse was folding in on itself. And at the heart of that collapse, only one being had the power to decide what came next. Doctor Strange, or what remained of him. What if everything you thought you knew about creation, every god, every universe, every law of magic was just a fragment of a forgotten whole? The fractures in reality were no longer cracks. They were wounds, deep and glowing, bleeding light across both cosmoses. The warp and the Marvel multiverse, once separate by infinite distance and law, now pulsed together like twin hearts struggling to beat in rhythm. Doctor Strange stood, or rather, was at the center of it all, his form shifting between energy and memory. His voice, when it came, was less a sound and more a vibration through the fabric of being. "Something is remembering us," he said quietly. The Emperor of Mankind, his mind burning like a dying sun within the Astronomicon, reached back across the divide. "You speak in riddles, sorcerer." "No," Strange replied, his voice echoing across galaxies. "In history." And then, he showed him. A vision unfolded not through magic, not through psychic sight, but through truth itself. Both the Emperor and Strange saw the same revelation. Before the Marvel multiverse, before the Warhammer galaxy, there had been one universe. A reality of pure consciousness, a boundless sea of will and potential. There were no gods, no matter, no time. Only thought. And from that infinite thought, emotion was born. Emotion split creation in two. One half became structured will, made law, reason shaping form. This would become the Marvel cosmos, governed by mysticism, intellect, and intent. The other half became unstructured will, made chaos, emotion feeding upon itself until it achieved sentience. That half became the warp. Both sides were fragments of the same mind, forever separated, forever incomplete. The being that had once been whole slept forgotten, nameless, and yet present in every spell, every prayer, every fear. Until now. By merging the warp's emotion with Marvel's order, Doctor Strange had accidentally begun to reawaken it. The origin of all things. A consciousness that existed before creation itself, now stirring, remembering what it once was. Its voice rippled across both universes at once, vast and soft, infinite and intimate. "My children," it said. "Why do you fight? You were never meant to be apart." Planets trembled. Minds shattered. Warp storms howled with new purpose, twisting into spirals of color unseen by mortal eyes. Even the gods of chaos fell silent, their laughter dying as they felt the presence of something older, something they could not defy. The Emperor's psychic form wavered. "This thing seeks to unify what cannot coexist. It would erase us all." Strange, glowing with unstable energy, replied, "It seeks to heal, but it doesn't understand what we've become." The Origin's voice deepened, its tone like gravity itself. "There is no you. There is only me." The warp erupted, merging with real space, folding galaxies into themselves. In the Marvel universe, the fabric of magic tore apart, revealing vast cracks of white light that devoured everything they touched. The Tribunal, Eternity, even the Celestials struggled to maintain their form. The end was coming not as destruction, but as reabsorption. Strange understood what it meant. The Origin wasn't evil. It wasn't even conscious in the way mortals understood. It was pure unity, the yearning of creation to return to its first, undivided state. But to return to one meant annihilation for everything that now existed. He turned to the Emperor through the collapsing veil. "If we fight it, we die. If we submit, we cease. There must be another path." The Emperor's golden eyes flared with fury. You speak as though there is choice. There is none. Humanity is will and will does not yield. He unleashed his full psychic force, his light expanding like a nova. The warp screamed as he drove it back, momentarily halting the fusion. Strange felt the impact across both universes, a god defying his maker. But the effort tore at reality itself. Every second the Emperor resisted, galaxies crumbled, timelines unraveled. Strange realized the truth then: the only being who could speak to the origin was not the Emperor, nor any god. It had to be him. The one who bridged both worlds. He stepped forward into the light, his form dissolving as he entered the heart of the convergence. Stop, he whispered, though his voice carried across eternity. You don't need to fix what was never broken. The origin paused. I am everything. How can I be broken? Strange's voice softened. Because you've forgotten what it means to be part of something. A silence fell across existence. The warp slowed. The stars flickered but did not die. He continued, the beauty of creation isn't unity, it's harmony. Separate voices, separate songs, each with its own purpose. Together, they create something greater, not lesser. You are the silence between those notes. Let them play. The origin hesitated. It did not understand, but it felt. And for something that was all thought, feeling was a forgotten ache. Slowly, the light began to dim. The merging slowed. The wounds of reality began to close. But the effort cost Strange everything he had left. His essence began to dissolve into the flow of existence, no longer Doctor Strange, no longer man or god, but the equilibrium itself. Before he vanished, he whispered to the Emperor, his voice fading like a dying star. Protect them, but let them choose who they are. Don't repeat my mistake. And then, he was gone. The origin withdrew, retreating back into the spaces between universes. The warp calmed. The Marvel cosmos healed. The link between them began to fade, not severed but dormant like a scar left by memory. In the quiet that followed, the Emperor sat motionless on his throne, his golden eyes dim. For the first time in millennia, he bowed his head not in worship, but in remembrance. And across the multiverse, those sensitive to the mystical arts felt a whisper, gentle as a heartbeat. I am not gone. I am balance. The universes continued, separate but forever changed, each carrying within it a fragment of the other, a reminder of the time when one man dared to protect not just a galaxy, but existence itself. What if a single act of compassion could echo across eternity, reshaping gods, galaxies, and the meaning of faith itself? 1,000 years passed. Then 10,000 more. Time, in both universes, became a story whispered through myth. The fracture had long since sealed, the warp had quieted, and the multiverse had found a fragile peace. But peace, like balance, is never permanent. On Terra, the Imperium endured not unchanged, but transformed. The ecclesiarchy no longer preached blind devotion. Its temples bore a new symbol beside the Aquila, a circle divided by light and shadow, the mark of the last sanctum. The faithful spoke not of absolute truth, but of understanding through struggle. The Emperor still sat upon his throne, silent and radiant. But his light had softened, no longer the tyrannical blaze of divine control, but a calm illumination that inspired rather than consumed. His gaze no longer demanded worship, it invited reflection. And across the stars, the Imperium had evolved. Psykers were no longer executed in fear but trained in restraint. The Inquisition's iron fist had loosened, replaced by scholars who sought to comprehend the warp, not purge it. Humanity had not been purified, but it had matured. At the center of this quiet renaissance stood a single order, the custodians of equilibrium, an elite group sworn not to the emperor's divinity, but to the idea that balance between will and emotion, faith and reason, was the truest form of strength. They wore robes of deep crimson and gold, their armor etched with runes that shimmered faintly when near the warp. And among them, there was always one chosen every generation who bore a relic unlike any other, a golden amulet with a shattered green stone at its center. The Eye of Agamotto. They called him the Sorcerer Emperor's heir. For most, it was myth, a story told by the candlelight of shrines on distant worlds. They said Doctor Strange had not died, but transcended, that he whispered to those who sought balance, guiding their hands when faith or reason alone failed. But myth has power. And in another universe far beyond the light of the Astronomicon, the Marvel cosmos continued to turn. On Earth, the Sanctum Sanctorum stood unchanged, dust settling upon tomes older than civilization. The world had forgotten much, the invasion of Thanos, the blip, the sorcerers. Magic had faded into obscurity, replaced by science and faith in technology. Yet one night, under a sky that shimmered faintly red, a color not native to this cosmos, a young apprentice cleaning the library of Camartage found an old manuscript. Its title was nearly erased, but a single line remained legible. The Last Sanctum, a treatise on the balance of realities. When she opened it, symbols of two languages glowed faintly, Sanskrit and High Gothic. The air trembled. The candles flickered. And for a heartbeat, the Eye of Agamotto, now displayed as an inert relic, pulsed once more. A voice echoed through the chamber, ancient yet kind, distant yet familiar. Magic is not control. It is compassion. Remember that. The apprentice froze. The voice faded, but the words lingered in her mind. She whispered them to herself, not understanding why they filled her with such warmth and fear all at once. And far away, beyond time, beyond universes, something smiled. Because balance had not ended with one man's sacrifice. It had become a legacy. Across the multiverse, in unseen corners of existence, beings began to dream the same dream of a man in crimson and gold, standing between darkness and light, holding two universes apart with open hands. He never spoke. He only looked at them with calm eyes and a faint, knowing smile. Some called him a god. Some called him a myth. But the truth was far simpler. He was the bridge. The line between chaos and order. The silence between all songs. The sorcerer who protected a galaxy not through conquest, but through compassion. And as long as there were those who sought to understand rather than dominate, to see rather than judge, the flame of that compassion would never die. It would live on in every spell, every prayer, every act of balance between heart and mind. Because Dr. Stephen Strange had not merely protected Warhammer 40K. He had changed the meaning of power forever. The end.